Welcome to the community forum today. I could see you wanted to have further winter adventures and just couldn't keep yourself indoors today. Spring is coming though. Please come forward and fill in the front seats and the middles also. We appreciate your help. This is important, especially to leave seats in the back for latecomers. My name is Kenneth Nose, and I'm the coordinator for today's forum, title of which is Property Values, Abandoned Homes and Real Estate Recovery, What's the Future? Given this subject, we hope to challenge you with new information or perspectives on issues that you'll continue to think about and perhaps even act on. As Unitarian Universalists, we believe in the continuing search for truth and the importance of serving others. We organize these forums on a wide variety of topics to educate ourselves about issues that affect us, either directly or indirectly, and that have an impact on our local community or the world around us. You'll have an opportunity to find out more about our unique religious traditions at our 11 o'clock service, and in the meantime, we welcome your questions and comments on today's forum when we open up to question and answer about 10 o'clock. We chose today's topic because our region suffers from a deeply troubled real estate market and a multitude of related community problems. Though difficult to pin down exactly, the magnitude of the problem is suggested by a variety of statistical descriptors. For example, the 2010 census estimated that nearly 20% of Cleveland's housing units were vacant or abandoned. Other agencies cite 7,000 properties already in line to be demolished, and another 6,500 likely to join them in the next few years. Others claim that 27,000 vacant properties exist in Cuyahoga County. Today's speakers have both worked for decades with this huge problem and continue to provide notable leadership in the efforts at revitalization. Tony Brancatelli is a gentleman on your right. Is a lifelong resident of Cleveland's southeast side, Ward 12, which includes the area called the Slavic Village. This community once held more than twice the number of its current residents in a thriving community of tidy homes and working class families. Shrinking population, economic shifts, and housing crisis have inflicted damage and change which Tony has addressed during the whole of his professional life. After serving as executive director of the Slavic Village Development Corporation for 17 years, Mr. Brancatelli entered city council in 2005. He is the point person on the city council addressing the massive foreclosure crisis which devastated the city of Cleveland. He is chairman of Cleveland Council's Development Planning and Sustainability Committee, which works with various partners to build strong communities and bring new business and development to Cleveland's neighborhoods and downtown. Mr. Brancatelli is also chair of the Cuyahoga County Land Utilization Corporation, better known as the County Land Bank, further working to address the foreclosure crisis. The gentleman on your left, Jim Rokakis, is currently the director of Thriving Communities Institute and vice president of the Western Reserve Land Conservancy. He was a 19-year member of Cleveland City Council. His first year entering council was the year Dennis Kucinich was mayor of Cleveland. Gives you some idea of the length of his service. He served 14 years as Cuyahoga County treasurer. He is a national leader in the fight against foreclosure and predatory lending. He testified in Congress and state legislatures across the country on these issues and has authored cover stories for the Outlook section of the Washington Post. He is the father of the Ohio Land Bank movement and helped to create 17 land banks in Ohio. He has raised over $182 million in demolition funding for communities throughout Ohio. He has appeared in numerous national media outlets, including 60 Minutes, Bill Moyer's Journal, All Things Considered, and Scott Simon's Weekend Edition. We feel very lucky to have both of these gentlemen here today. I believe, Tony, you
we flipped a coin and Jim won. So I'll go first. First off, thank you, and if you don't mind, Jim and I will just sit here. It'll be more of an open dialogue. We're hoping to have a pretty vibrant discussion here. And I apologize now, I'm a little bit under the weather, so if I have to excuse myself, it's mostly to go out and roll around in the snow. And the weather really is like our housing market. We really can't predict it, and we're not quite sure where it's going. But we know eventually it's going to change, and we're hopefully, for God's intervention, that the market changes for the better. Just a little bit of history about myself. I'm a council person. I was born and raised in the Slavic Village community, and really spent about 20 years of my life working around community organizing, planning, and redevelopment of our neighborhood. I am second generation immigrant. My mother's family is from Poznan, Poland, and my father's family is from Messina, Sicily. So I'm right down the middle, and have seen a lot of changes in the community. And looking at how the community was really developed, it was an old industrial neighborhood, really built off of immigrants coming to work in the mills, and it's pretty much you would see a lot of old industrial neighborhoods. A lot of walking bridges, a lot of dense population. At our peak, we were at 70,000 people in the 30s and 40s when the mills were going strong and had a real high demand of labor. And so we've seen a lot of changes go on in our community. We've seen a lot of changes go on in our city. And in order to adapt to those changes, we've seen some of both the negative and positive impacts of a growing city and expanding city. In our peak population, we all know the city of Cleveland was one of the largest in the nation at one point, and had nearly 1 million people. And part of that, when we look at the most vibrant part of our city heritage and past, is also what is really kind of dragging us down on the market today. When you look at our neighborhood, it was a lot of industrial factory-built homes to get immigrants here to work the mills, and on very substandard and less than desirable lots, what we wouldn't build on today. And when I look at our older market and try and understand how do we change and shape the market differently today, I also see how the crisis in the housing market has impacted us and has accelerated what we need to do. I was at a national conference a couple of years ago in New Orleans, and the mayor of New Orleans talked about how Katrina didn't cause the devastation in New Orleans. It exposed it for the weaknesses that it had. And I pretty much say that about the housing crisis that we're facing today in our neighborhood. It exposed our housing market for weaknesses that it already had in Cuyahoga County and the surrounding counties. And when I look at the typology of our housing market, and we study and map the changes that have gone on, we can really see direction of where we should be going. When we were doing development in Slavic Village, during my tenure there, we had built some 500 new houses, had renovated over 1,000 houses, and we were practicing the shrinking city before it was a popular discussion and before Hunter got paid a lot of money in a consultant agreement in Youngstown to do it. I hope there's no relatives of Hunter in here, sorry. But we were trying to change the footprints already, and then the housing crisis was thrust upon us. As a freshman council person walking into the city of Cleveland, in 2007, we had the worst foreclosure, the housing foreclosure rate in Slavic Village was the highest in the United States. So welcome to City Council, and welcome to the worst foreclosure crisis that we've had since the Great Depression. And as Jim could attest to, I'm just a council person. We're kind of like the guy that comes in after the elephants leave the circus, and we're picking up after them. And we have very little control of what happens in front of us, but we have to clean up the mess behind, and that's what we're tasked to do. I'm not a congressperson, not a state senator. We don't have the authority to change the laws to really move the mortgage industry around, but quite frankly, I look at this foreclosure crisis not quite as a foreclosure crisis, but as a mortgage fraud crisis. When I look at the irresponsible lending that had occurred and what got us in this mess, there's also a direction of how we're trying to figure out how do we get out of it. So fast forward, we all know the blight that's in our neighborhoods. We all see the thousands and thousands of abandoned houses, and we all have to raise our hand and say, we tried building ourselves out of the economy in the 1990s, and we were having a building boom across the entire United States, and that was propping up our economy. Now we're faced with the after effects of overbuilding in a market that couldn't sustain that kind of growth. So in Cuyahoga County and our county surrounding, we continued to build despite the fact that our economy was flat and in fact declining in some areas, and now we're stuck with excess amount of housing. We have thousands and thousands of units of housing across our region that can and should never be occupied again. They're substandard houses. They were built prior to the war. They were built clearly to get folks here to work the mills and work some of our industry, and they're dysfunctional in today's standard. So we have to figure out how to clean up that mess. As we're working through and cleaning up that mess, quite frankly, I've had the pleasure of having the foreclosure crisis in my backyard. I've gotten to meet people from all over the world. Jim and I have done shows in France. We both sound very smart when we're dubbed in French. We. We've done stories from Japan, Australia, Germany, and when they come over and see our city, they really embrace our city. They don't see the crisis as something that we can't control, but what does amaze them is how little we value our inner cities. When you travel abroad, you see how valuable inner cities are. They're the most valuable pieces of real estate in many, many countries. We tended to toss that away. When we did the Highway Act in the 50s, I talk about the largest population loss in our neighborhoods wasn't from white flight, it was from the automobile, driving people down the highway and creating more off-ramps. And that's the challenge that we've had to face. We continue to chew up farmland, and we continue to devalue the city. When we talk about the most sustainable practice, let's look at developing our cities first. So here we are with thousands of abandoned properties, and one of the challenges that came to us is how do we continue to move forward in clearing off the blight that's in our markets. And that's what Jim had done when he had gone to testify to Congress. We've testified in front of the Treasury, and we've been challenged to say, how can demolition add value? So we commissioned a study, which you can find on Jim's website, and on City Council's website as well, through Thriving Communities, to look at how demolition adds value. And we've had mathematicians, we've had some great folks who understand this at the 50,000-foot level and can analyze data and look at data. So what we did was look at the number of demolitions that have occurred in our region, drilled down and tried to understand, well, how does that impact our market? And I'll just jump up and look at a couple of boards. But one is, there's this misconception that we're doing nothing within our region. And quite frankly, we've been very aggressive, not just in demolition, but also in redevelopment. So the board on your left really talks about kind of the vacant and distressed properties that we have in Cleveland now. In the city of Cleveland, we have over 10,000 vacant and abandoned properties. 8,000 of them are considered abandoned and distressed. We know that we have 6,000 that are already condemned and waiting for the wrecking ball. Basically, that equates to nearly $100 million in demand to help clear the deck of the problems that we have. These are some of the properties that we've already cleared, and what Jim has spoken to in Congress, what he euphemistically calls the flying V, which really was the foreclosure rate coming into the worst parts of our neighborhoods and having a negative impact. But on the positive side, the city of Cleveland has renovated, since the Jackson administration over the past 8 years, nearly 5,000 units of housing have either been renovated or built new. And you can see that it's really spread evenly across the city. There's been a significant amount of investment. We've invested millions and millions of dollars. So we know how to rehab, we know how to build new, and we know how to reshape our markets. We've been very strategic in looking at the demands in our market, analyzing them, and trying to build in model block areas and trying to understand where the concentration of development makes the most sense. We know our good markets, we know our hot markets, and we've done a good job of analyzing that. On the flip side is we wanted to understand where we can be most impactful in demolition and showing how it adds value. So when you read the report, you'll understand, as you dig down deeper, you'll be able to see that demolition can add value. It adds value mostly in the stronger markets and moderate markets. It does not add value in the distressed markets and the worst and the weakest markets. But the other part of the study, which was incredibly important, was that it also lowered the foreclosure rate in all markets. So as we demolished and cleared the worst properties, we were able to see the foreclosure market go down and down and down in every one of the markets we have. And these green and light green areas are where it adds the most value. And then, of course, the red and kind of the orangish colors are where it does not add value. But you can see in the surrounding suburbs that demolition does, in fact, add value to the real estate market, and that's one of the directions that we're going. If you want to hop back in. So we're focused on, and I know it's kind of singular, but really when the focus of this forum is really kind of property values and what does recovery look like. And I'm going to continue to beat the drum that recovery does require us to clear the deck. It's something that's counterintuitive to most of us. We don't look at demolition as being a positive tool, but we're seeing and can quantify that demolition can in fact be a positive tool. We are not doing this in a vacuum, and it's not singular that demolition is the only tool that we want to use. We're tracking this with an incredibly robust county land bank, city land bank, and redevelopment strategy that every one of the municipalities are putting in place. And I'm blessed to be sitting next to Jim, the father of the county land bank. It's been a fabulous tool. We've been able to clear real estate in a very proactive way, put it back to productive use or take it offline. And some of this is simple formulas. It's numerator and denominator. We have to take all the distressed properties off the market so we can help improve the property values. When we start looking at some of the headlines that we see today where the housing market's getting better, let's start looking at our market internally and seeing how many days on the market some of these properties are. How long have they been sitting there? And also let's look at the critical component of what has it done to the real estate values that we have. In a Plain Dealer article the other day, when they talked about the impact of the levy and what Jim's going to speak about on how it impacts our real estate values, in the last valuation that the city did, that the county did for the city's market for valuation for the school district and why our levy was so high, it says it dropped the taxable value of all Cleveland property from $5.7 billion to $4.9 billion. One valuation dropped our market nearly $1 billion. That is a huge impact on the housing crisis, which is why we need to really focus on changing it. I'll turn it over to Jim.
Okay, thanks, Tony. Tony is the most amazing leader. I was telling somebody on the way in here, they asked me who my heroes are. Actually, nobody asks me anymore, but if they were to ask me, I would tell them it's Tony Brancatelli. He has been fighting the good fight for many, many years and has been a national leader. He was featured in a New York Times cover story, and he's about to be in 60 Minutes. They're doing a story. You know, there's one of the most notorious property flippers in the country was operating out of Slavic Village, and Tony and others were relentless in their pursuit of him. And the judge gave him shock probation, said he can come out of prison early, but he had to go work for Slavic Village and Tony Brancatelli, at which point he told the judge with complete seriousness, "I'll go back to prison." True story. And
I felt a little self-conscious here.
Judge McMonigal would not allow that. He's now actually working with Tony in the very neighborhood that he helped to depopulate through his practices. So I don't know when I was here last. Maybe Susan knows. I think I was still in public office 2 years ago. Okay, so I wasn't in public office. It was post-corruption trials, though. Okay. So 3 years ago today, actually, I began working with the Western Reserve Land Conservancy. It's a land conservation organization working in a 14-county footprint, primarily preserving wild areas, farms, streams, wetlands, and doing really phenomenal work in the footprint of the Western Reserve. I was approached in 2010 by Rich Cochran, who directs it, and said, you know, I love doing what I do, but somehow I know that in my 14-county footprint I have cities like Cleveland and Akron and Canton and Youngstown and Warren and Lorraine, and I know that there are millions of people that never see the Grand River, they never go fly fishing on the Chagrin River, they never go out and visit some of these beautiful areas we protected. I want to have an impact in urban areas. He says, would you help set up land banks in Northeast Ohio? I'd like that in every county we do business. So we've done that. We now have land banks in every land bank in every Northeast Ohio county with the exception of Cuyahoga and Medina, but our work has spread beyond that. We've worked our way into Southwest Ohio, where we felt we needed a political imprint. Southwest Ohio fought land banks with real tenacity, but now that there are land banks in Cincinnati and Butler County, the home of John Boehner, and Montgomery County, Dayton, and Columbus and Toledo, we have much easier time in Columbus. So it was initially our goal was to start land banks. As I did this, though, and I started making a case for land banks in counties around the region, it was a Youngstown mayor who cut me off in the middle of a conversation and said, let's cut to the chase. You have money for demolition. And I started to explain how we might raise it, and he said, look, if you don't have money for demolition, he said, for me, land banks are like a new car with no gas. They're nice to look at, but they take me nowhere. He said, seriously, if you can't find money for demolition, he said, this conversation is a waste of both of our times. So what happened was this job, I keep morphing in it. We morphed into a procurer of demolition funds. And a couple of things happened. We're very fortunate. One was we knew there was a settlement coming. There were 5 major banks had been sued by 50 state attorneys general for the robo-signing fraud. No surprise, banks that couldn't get loans straight couldn't do foreclosures right either. And it was a $25 billion settlement, most of which went to borrowers. But Ohio received a $93 million settlement. We approached Mike DeWine in late 2011 and said, don't give it back to the general fund. I know what's going to happen. Most states did give it back to the general fund. To please work with us and make it available to cities for demolition. DeWine said, this is for victims of the foreclosure crisis. And we said, give us a couple of hours and we'll show you who the real victims of the foreclosure crisis are. We visited neighborhoods in Youngstown and Cleveland, got to see a lot of elderly folks who were trapped in neighborhoods, who had played by the rules. They paid their taxes on time, they took care of their property through no fault of their own. Houses around them had become abandoned because of the crisis, and their single most valuable asset, their home, had no value. And to his credit, you know, I'm not from that party, but let me tell you, I was talking to somebody earlier, this crisis has equal blame in both parties. And you have to know, you can't blame this crisis on either the D's or the R's, because in reality, if you want to look at some of the worst abuses, in 1999 we repealed Glass-Steagall, and the president there was not an R, he was a D. But in any event, so DeWine put up $75 million. We leveraged $47 million through a match. There was $122 million made available for demolition, which is great, except that there, by our count, 100,000 vacant and abandoned properties in Ohio. We need $1 billion. So that 122 is a good start. Tony and I went off to the Treasury Department in 2012. We argued that they owned the vacant property problem. And our argument to Treasury was, with the collapse of Fannie and Freddie, the U.S. government, you, all of us in this room, now backstop 9 out of 10 mortgages. And we said, isn't it smarter for you to make $100 million available for demolition in a city like Cleveland, as opposed to watching 1,000 mortgages at $100,000 go bad? You're going to eat all of those. I think it makes more sense to help us on demo. So Treasury said, fine, prove it. Tony was there, September of 12. We went out and raised $140,000 through 13 sources, though the primary sponsor was Cleveland City Council. And the study, in fact, proved that in the aggregate, demolitions do prevent foreclosures. There were interesting value calculations. We did it well. So while the study began in December of 2012, the White House actually called our office on their first week of January 2013 and said, where's the data? Well, we just started, folks. And they said, it was the White House Office of Economic Policy. We put them in touch with our researchers, and they fed the White House all of our data on a 6-month basis. And in well advance of the release of the study, in June of last year, White House called and said, we're convinced, we don't need any more data, we're good. And they announced that week, June 3rd actually, that they were going to allow money in state Ohio Housing Finance Agency department funds for foreclosure prevention. They were going to allow that money to be reallocated for demolition. The next day, Michigan announced $100 million. Any of you been to Detroit, by the way? It is just, it's apocalyptic, folks. I don't know, I spend a lot of time there. The new number they're estimating in Detroit is 102,000 houses awaiting demolition in the city, which is, as I was telling somebody in Akron last week, the equivalent of every single residential property in Akron, Barberton, and Stowe, because we're doing work down there as well. So anyway, so they freed it up, $60 million for Ohio. You probably saw the announcement in the paper yesterday, not as much as what I liked, about $10.5 million now being made available for Cuyahoga County, so we're on the way. We need a lot more, but as Tony said, the building department has said to me the number is 8,300. I don't know what the number is, Tony, 8,300, 9,000, 10,000. 8,300 houses that they think need to come down that are condemned, but you have to look at the rest of the county. There's probably another 2,000 to 2,500 structures in East Cleveland. And if you look at the inner ring suburbs, the number actually probably adds another 2,000 to 3,000. I'm going to tell you right now, Tony said, you're not going to hear about property values. You're not going to stabilize property values in this county until you stabilize property values in the core. You can keep looking the other way. You can keep thinking that Cleveland is not your problem, but in fact, Cleveland is your problem. And I have here today Mark Gillespie, who was formerly with the Plain Dealers, been working with us on a study. I'm going to put these cards down. Mark has worked on a study, and we've been looking at what is the impact on people of Cuyahoga County of property values plummeting in the core, but also the inner ring suburbs. So we studied Euclid, we studied Newburgh Heights, we studied Warrensville, we studied Garfield, Maple, and of course the city of Cleveland. Since 2009, is that the year? 50%, those communities have lost 50% in value. In fact, since 2006, Maple Heights has lost 68. 68%. Median home price in Maple Heights in 2006, about 109,000, 105 down to 38, Mark, 39, 34,000. I'll tell you what that's done for those of you who live like me in a comfortable suburb, or those of you who live in Gates Mills or Chagrin or wherever you might live. I happen to live in Rocky River. It shifted $47 million in tax burden from those communities where values have plummeted to communities where values have not plummeted. And that means that's Tri-C, that's Health and Human Services, that means the metro parks. So what you realize is this is your problem. So it's moved out, and we have to continue to try to find a way to stabilize the core. The city's been very heavily involved in doing demolition. The state has now put money up through DeWine. The feds have put money up. The only entity that has not really stepped up to the plate has been county government. And much to our enjoyment, to our thrill, to our surprise, I might add, 2 weeks ago, and we've been working with the county council to make a move in this area, the county executive announced at the state of the county that they're going to set aside, they're going to go out with a $50 million bond to do demolition in Cuyahoga County. I think it's great news. I think it was a surprise to the county council members, none of whom knew about it, but I meet with them, and I said, look, get over your bruised egos. It's a good move. He's to be commended for doing it. You found money, $250 million for a hotel next to a convention center. You need to find money for demolition. So we're working with them very closely, and our hope is that they're going to continue to move in this direction. I know I don't have much time left, Susan. Let me just say this, that the Western Reserve Land Conservancy has been looking very closely at the What Next proposition. One of the things we're going to work on, and I want to come back and talk to you about someday, is an effort that's underway now that will be involved in a massive reforestation of the city of Cleveland. There was been a tree canopy study done by Cuyahoga County. You know, the county's at about a 38% tree canopy. The city is at an 18% tree canopy. It's one of the poorest tree canopies in the state of Ohio of any urban area. Here's what we have, folks. We have thousands of acres of vacant land, thousands of acres of vacant land. And some of the best tree nurseries in the country are in a place called Lake County. So I hope to be able to come back to the religious communities, to civic organizations, to people all over Northeast Ohio, and to get you involved in a project that we hope will replant 100,000 trees in the city of Cleveland, which we think will help to make the city healthier, help to make the city safer, and help to, I think, create an environment that will bring people back after we've torn down all those houses. So that may be for another forum, another time, but I know we're out of time, right? You want Q&A, Tony?
Just sure. And before we hit Q&A, you know, because we don't want to be all doom and gloom and talk about just demolition and repurposing, I do want to talk about, I mentioned earlier about the county land bank and our city land bank and the exciting things that are going on in our communities. We have some great opportunities in our communities. We're starting to see a lot of vibrancy. One of the things about having the nonprofits like the county land bank, like the city land bank, and our community development corporations, which I was where I came from, Slavic Village Development, there are exciting things happening with our CDCs. I wanted to show a quick video of some of the work that our CDCs are doing, and then we can lead into questions, because I think it really shows that there are opportunities that we can capture with our different land bank, and I would be remiss not to point out our director of our City of Cleveland Land Bank. Where did she go? Oh, there she is, Terry Robbins in the back. Uh-oh. Oh. Where did it go? Did we go to Xbox? How did I end up here?
You're very brave, Tony. I'd never show screen on my computer.
While we wait for that, before we start into questions and answers,
Oh,
we're
there it
going to
is.
pass around
Video.
clipboards to ask you to sign it if you are not on our email list and would like to receive an email notice of future community forums. We also have an orange brochure attached to the clipboards, and which give a quick overview of the upcoming weekly forums. Feel free to take the brochures and give them to others.
Let me see if I can find these. I guess I may not have this video.
Should we take questions then? or- Should we go into the Q&A then?
Sure, let's go into questions, and then we'll close with the video. Go ahead.
Will you please present the size?
Wait just a minute, we have to use the microphone for every question. This is being recorded, so we want to be very careful and have people speak loudly and clearly into the microphone. Thank you.
Talk about right here. Yes, ma'am.
And
Will
give your name, address, and how much you pay in real estate taxes. No, just kidding.
Will you please give the side the preservationists? They argue that what you tear down is part of our heritage and what made Cleveland different than other places. And just will you present that, and then you can refute it if you want.
Well, at the request of Cleveland City Council, is my mic on?
You're off again.
Okay, here, at the request of,
There you go.
should be on, the request of Cleveland City Council, among the things we're doing is we are working with the Cleveland Restoration Society. We're going to be identifying historic properties. We have to have we have a contract working in the St. Luke's target areas, which includes Buckeye, Woodland Hills, Shaker, Larchmere, Mount Pleasant. And there are efforts underway there as well as citywide, fair to say, Tony, that we'll try to identify historic properties and try to, attract attention and try to attract interest in restoring those properties. But the reality is that most of the properties we're talking about don't fall into that category. If you've seen the properties that are condemned around the city, the vast majority are, I'd like to tell you, are more exciting, but they're not. I don't know, Tony, if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I think that, I could bring the thousands of properties that are already condemned, that are distressed, and when you look at those aren't worth restoring. They're 800, 900 square foot shotgun factory-built homes that have outlived their useful life. And we understand that there are a significant number of structures that can be and will be saved. We're going through a project now called Slavic Village Recovery. It's a partnership with Albert Ratner for City Enterprises and Robert Klein of Safeguard Properties, where we are in fact taking houses that should be saved and restoring them through a program called Slavic Village Recovery. So there is a lot of restoration going on, but we also understand we can't save a home when there's condemned homes on either side of it that need to be torn down because no one will buy it. No matter how much you invest, I can renovate any home. I've done it for 20 years, but when there's no market, that's not going to help save the homes.
There's a question
Oh,
here.
I'm sorry.
Okay, here we go.
All right.
Hunter's latest visioning process has come to, not surprisingly, the same conclusion that you've just been talking about, that we've got to reinvest in the urban areas or taxes throughout the area are going to become impossibly high. Those recommendations have been approved. Do you see any way that there will be implementation of those recommendations?
I've been part of that effort. I've been part of an effort also led by Mayor Bill Curran of Hudson and trying to bring governments together to work cooperatively on issues. They came together over the issue of tax sharing. I've been to those meetings for years, and I watch one suburban mayor after another get up and walk out of the room. I saw the mayors of Willoughby walk out, Avon Lake walk out, people from Russia Township by my alma mater in Oberlin. And I'm telling you that for a reason, which is trying to bring these disparate city governments together on issues like this is truly like herding cats. And I think regionalism is tough, so you have to sometimes do it backdoor. And as much as I love what Hunter did, and as much as I love what NEO SCC said, I think you have to be realistic about what the chances are of getting people in a place like Willoughby Hills to step up on a solution that assists people in East Cleveland. In fact, when he walked out of the room, he got up and said, I'm not putting one blankety blank dollar forward to help. I mean, it was really that ugly. So I guess my point is, this is on tape. I shouldn't have said that. I'm sorry. Look, I agree with it. I think it's great. The reality is, in my experience of government, is trying to get people to see governance in Northeast Ohio from a regional prism is tough. So you have to look at other ways to get to it.
And the County Land Bank, I think, is a wonderful example of a regional entity that can bring all the different sides together, because everyone participates through the funding mechanism that it has. And believe me, it was not an easy task. Quite frankly, it was Herculean that Jim, in a very timely moment of time, was able to get down and get that state law passed when it was first conceived, there was really consideration of, okay, everybody but us. You know what, go ahead and do it, we're not participating. And Jim said, fine, we're going full speed ahead, and we're doing Cuyahoga County, and now everybody is on board and looking at how that becomes a critical tool, but looking at that kind of regional approach to fixing our entire land issue is important.
What happens to the lots on which the demolished properties are located? Are they resold? Who maintains them? And how do you deal with that problem? You put them up for sale, or are they used for public purposes?
Well, we've had if you look through the City of Cleveland's land bank as well as the Cuyahoga County land bank, there's some incredibly creative reuses of land. Some are just as basic as side yard expansion for people who have 25 and 30-foot lots will now have a 50-foot lot and something that's more sustainable footprint. In areas where we've been able to do urban agriculture, we've been able to do urban farms. We've also been able to do job creation. By assembling land, we've been able to build manufacturing footprints large enough to hold manufacturers. We've been able to expand businesses. So it's been a little bit of everything, basically all of the above when it comes to looking at land reuse. There's been some strategies that have been done out of Kent State Urban Design School around what reimagining looks like. So there's been some incredibly creative ways of reusing land on top of building new housing. We have been able to assemble land right behind Third Federal Savings on Union and Broadway. Third Federal kicked off a 100-unit new construction site called Trailside Homes. They've been very aggressive in assembling land, taking the foreclosure crisis and turning it upside down and having a real positive impact. So we have seen some incredibly useful and creative ways of reusing land.
But a lot of it just not that dramatic. If you're next door, you've been looking at a abandoned property for 10 years. After they demolish, if you want the lot, it's yours. And that works where there is a house next door. Reality is there are some areas where there are next door neighbors or nobody willing to take on that responsibility. And over time, those lots are going to aggregate. The city land bank, Terry, you know the number. I've heard 35,000 lots. What's the number? 12,000. Well, geez, Terry, that's not.
We have 35,000 lots, only 12,000 in the land bank.
In the land bank, all right. If you're successful in taking down another 8, 9, 10,000 houses, you're going to see some significant increases in vacant properties. So where there's a next door neighbor, great. But again, this whole greening strategy is one that I think the city needs to look at. It does beg the question, who's going to take care of it? And that's a significant issue. Right now, the city's taking care of it. I mean, they've got crews out cutting lawns all summer, so, and maintaining a lot of land, so. There's a,
Okay. Well, I'd like to first testify to the land bank. I just got out of the Army. I came back from Afghanistan, and I'm purchasing a house that's a duplex in Euclid, and the land bank has been fantastic. Okay. Okay. I just got out of the Army, and I'm purchasing a house through the land bank in Euclid. It's a duplex, so I'll be using it as an investment property and then to own. Additionally, the lot next door is vacant, and I'm proposing to purchase it to plant trees and, to green fine. So I'd like to touch upon a few things. One thing, you talk about herding cats. I have a buddy in Arizona. He bought a house in Tempe, and I'm telling him, like, you guys are sucking the Colorado River dry. Your property, in America, we don't value property based on real assets. For example, Ohio land is good agricultural land. It's good, in 100 years it'll have its value, whereas this desert land and we build these highways to nowhere, it doesn't make any sense. And that's not just a Cuyahoga problem, that's a national problem, because I'm talking to a smart buddy of mine. He went to Ohio State, he's got dual degrees, and he can't see this. And this is an intelligent person. And I don't even have one degree. I came back from a war zone, and I'm like, how do you not see this? So I'd like to also commend you on greenifying the city, because I do agree. And also, this is more of a freakonomics note, because I have more of I look at, because I've been looking to buy houses through Fannie Mae, now the land bank, but I see a lot of illegal renting going on in these communities. So when you demolish these properties, a lot of landlords that don't play by the rules and eat up these streams of income, now these streams of income are being diverted to landlords that do play by the rules, that do fairly invest in your communities, guys that live in the communities that care about the standards being upheld. Whereas maybe a guy in Arizona or LA, he doesn't care what his property looks like, as long as he's getting some form of residual income.
Did you find the house on the internet, on the website?
That's correct, because
Okay.
I had been dealing with Fannie Mae, and they had been very difficult. And then I contacted
I'll
the
refrain.
Cuyahoga County Land Bank, and they rolled out the red carpet. to
So
deal with
for
me.
those of you interested, if you go to the Cuyahoga County Land Bank website on the right-hand side, you will see literally dozens, hundreds of properties that are available. They do try to rehabilitate them. And this phony argument, and I say it's phony because I think it's overplayed by the media, your former employer, Mark. It's not a matter of demolition or rehab. It really is a matter of doing both. But I've been arguing with a former colleague in city council. We've had these public debates saying, you know, all you talk about is demolition. You know, the land bank he blames for the out-migration of people in the city. Let me tell you the problem for people in the city of Cleveland who are fighting out-migration. Their problem is not the land bank, and it's not demolition. Their problem is the $40,000 house you could buy in South Euclid. It's the $30,000 house in Euclid. It's the $50,000 house in Cleveland Heights. Part of why the city is emptied out, yes, the foreclosure crisis really kind of tipped the thing over. But there's always been reasons, there have been push factors in the city. But when you have real estate devalued, as much as it's been devalued throughout Northeast Ohio, now you have the pull factor in effect, and it's been devastating. So we have to find a way to fight back with that, and I think it's going to take time. You know, this crisis is now, you know, the foreclosures took off in Cleveland in 1995. So we're in the 19th year of this crisis. And we still will have, in Cuyahoga County in 2013, we had close to 10,000 foreclosures, which is still about 3 times what the average was pre-1995. So we're not out of this yet.
I love the idea of demolition, and I love the idea of the greening of the city. And I assume that there's going to be a lot of infill in this empty, and you mentioned some of the things that are happening. Is there anybody watching that the infill fits the neighborhood? In other words, I think about Portland, Oregon, where they demolish something and they build something new. It's not too high. It looks good in the neighborhood. And are we looking to that if you rebuild in a neighborhood, you should respect the way the neighborhood looks in your rebuilding?
Our community development department is very conscious of building within the typology of the community, and the planning department works very closely together with community development and making sure that when somebody presents designs of what is going to be built, that it mirrors and mimics what is already within the community. So if it's 2.5 story, if it's near the street line or setback from the street line, that it carries the same rhythm and balance that the rest of the neighborhood has. In some cases, some neighborhoods don't have a real exact, it's not brick, it's not bungalow, it's not, but for the most part, it's been pretty clear. Now, if you're doing some standalone developments, you can create a whole new kind of architecture design. When I look at Mill Creek, when we designed that, it really was kind of a new urbanism, lots of front porches, back-loaded garages, on alleyway access, there's no lot lines. You can be a lot more creative. Some of the things that have been done in Tremont or Little Italy, you can see some really kind of cool new hip designs. But for the most part, in the infill, we've really tried to respect what's been in the community.
I have a question, and the young man raised the point of the market, and you just addressed part of it, but who is the market that would be moving in? And the data shows that there's a real comeback to the downtown area of Cleveland, and that there is an increase in population growth among the young folks. So I guess who is that market that's going to come and fill the Slavic Village and the East Side and all? So
We have, it's a good question. And trying to understand that is really the challenge for many of us, but we have some very vibrant markets. Downtown, the occupancy rate is near 100%, and we can't bring units online fast enough downtown to really meet that demand. When you see in some of the urban areas like Detroit Shoreway or University Circle, you're starting to see families starting to move in, somebody with a child or 2 child, kind of the new millenniums are starting to come into these communities. You're also looking at markets like Slavic Village, working class families, looking for their first home, looking for a good bargain and a house that's pretty reliable. So you try and look at the demographic and fit that demographic with the market of what you're building in. So it's market by market. It's not one size fits all in Cuyahoga County or in Cleveland. You really have to look at each different neighborhood and what it would be attracting to. Detroit Shoreway is a wonderful arts community. You can start seeing around Gordon Square and where it's building up, University Circle around the academics. So each market fits each one of the typologies, and you try and match it to that particular typology.
You know, it's funny, the years I was in, we always think of market in terms of home ownership, right? So in all the years I was in city council, yes, going back to the days of Dennis Kucinich, it was a great first 2 years. It wasn't baptism by fire, it was baptism by blowtorch. You know, nobody ever wrote a book about that period of time, which to this day still astonishes me. If you think about what happened in that 2-year period, that's at least 2 volumes. But any event, I railed against tenants because I didn't want tenants. I wanted home ownership because I believed that home ownership was the bedrock of a solid neighborhood. So here we are now. We've now tightened lending restrictions so much that people who in the past would have easily been able to get a mortgage, they're struggling to get one. We also see a new demographic among people who are moving in and out of communities. They may not want to be tied to home ownership. And I'm wondering if we can't find a model that creates a responsible, and downtown, there's not much home ownership, right? They're all renters by and large. So I'm just wondering if we can't think about how we might create responsible tenancy. Because if there's anything the foreclosure crisis taught me, it's as much as I'd like to think everybody should be a homeowner, not everybody can be a homeowner. And we saw that, right? So we can encourage it, but it has to be responsible. So I'm wondering if we can't even think about a new model that includes rental-based housing in a way that's responsible.
My wife and I, we live in Shaker, and there's a vacant lot next to us where they tore down the house. Wouldn't it be more cost effective for the communities if the communities would let the next door neighbor adopt the lot and take care of the lot without charging them the property taxes?
Well, generally, in taking over the lots, when we've done side yard expansions, one of the things we've encouraged is to do lot consolidations. When you do the lot consolidation, it doesn't really change your tax base appreciably much. So it's there are adopted lots and leases. The city of Cleveland's been very creative, and Terry's got a whole bundle of lease for gardening, lease for lots of different types of uses. You don't have to be the neighbor sometimes under a lease. You can adopt a lot and turn it into a community garden. So community by community, there's lots of different ways. And adopting a lot and doing a lease is something that the city of Cleveland's been doing for some years now.
You know, the land bank up in Erie County has a program that's called Mow to Own. If you mow the grass, I think for 2 years they give you the lot. But you like that?
Sounds like a tax return company.
Now, I've also been told, I hear the rumor is that property taxes in Shaker Heights are high. That's what I've heard. I don't. And your question, you make a good point. I think that if you're going to see a lot of vacant land in cities like Cleveland Heights and Shaker Heights, can't be part of a larger redevelopment plan, finding a way to make it available to an adjoining neighbor without penalizing them in a punitive way, because you know how high taxes are in Shaker. But you know, speaking of property taxes, we've been kicking around another idea. Back to the greening idea and reforesting the city. You know, when I was a city councilman, you probably know this, Tony, nobody ever called and said plant a tree. Everybody called and said, take this tree down. It's blocked my sewers. I don't want to rake the leaves. I don't need it. Get rid of it. We have to find a way to incentivize people to respect old trees, but also to incentivize them, I think, through the property tax system to encourage them to plant trees on their property. There is a whole battery of studies out there that talk about the importance of trees in assuring health in communities. I don't know, just astonishing that there are these studies that show where there are no trees, mortality spikes. In Chicago, they learned a couple summers ago that there was an incredible high mortality rate among the elderly, poor elderly, because there was no shade. You couldn't bring down temperatures in cities, so I think we could use it to incentivize people to take over land and not get penalized, but also to keep their properties green.
One of the pieces that, and I know you're all going to go home and Google and get Thriving Institute and read the 200-page study that Nigel did. But one of the things that he talks about, 98, was amenities and disamenities. And part of the amenities was green space in terms of adding value. And you'll see that correlation within the study.
And you know, they're going to make marijuana legal in the house. What can grow hemp, Tony?
There you go.
Anyway, I know you're on tape, sorry.
My glaucoma's acting up a little, so.
You know, I have to tell you one funny story. When I was on 60 Minutes a few years ago, a woman called me from an Indian reservation in the West, and she said she saw me on 60 Minutes, that's great, and she said she wanted to come to Cleveland, she wanted 5 acres. And I'm listening to this, saying, is this real? And then she said, I only have one question. She says, is medical marijuana legal in Ohio?
I have a question for Mr. Rokakis. I'd like to take the discussion back to demolition and asbestos. If you go, I came late, so maybe you covered this, but what's the dilemma of taking, which is better, to take more houses down or to take houses down with asbestos in them?
Well, a house that has to come down has to come down. Our problem is, it's funny you mentioned asbestos, it's a dirty word in the demolition world. Here's what happened. Up until November of 2010, if you were taking down a single property, you were held to a very loose standard on asbestos remediation. What it basically required you to do is if you saw asbestos in the pipe wrap, or you knew certain kinds of siding, both on the side of a house or the floor, if you knew certain kinds of asbestos existed, you were required to take it down responsibly. In December 2010, and Tony will tell you, Region 5 out of Chicago said, new rule, every house being taken down by cities or by land banks is now subjected to a really high level of scrutiny, which includes testing, a 90-day delay, and an asbestos remediation standard that is now taking 25 cents of every dollar we spend on demolition. So what we have been trying, and Tony will tell you, you might want to pick up, we have been trying to get the folks at Region 5 to work with us on and there's the irony though, if you're an individual and you want to take down your house, you're not held to the stricter standard. And I understand their rationale. Now that this is occurring in such massive quantities, that massive numbers of houses being down, we have to adopt the stricter standard. Well, pick your poison. You know, do you want to take fewer houses down and then tell people who live in those communities they're going to have to live next door to that house which has been broken into and set afire, has become a crime scene? I don't have to tell you the correlation between vacant properties and crime, because there's study after study after study that shows it. It wouldn't be tolerated where I live. You don't see vacant houses in Rocky River, and I bet you don't see them very long in Shaker Heights or Beechwood or Bay Village. So we tend to let things go in cities, and we shouldn't. But the asbestos question is one that haunts us.
And we have, I mean, for me, it's pretty galling to spend 20 to 25% of our resources for an environmental review that we were able to do internally with the appropriate standards that we live by. Removing asbestos is a simple and basic function anymore. We understand how to do it. We know how to do it responsibly. The county land bank and the city has taken on some real responsible demolition policies. We recycle most all the material that comes out of our properties. We crush the brick, the asphalt, we take it to a recycling plant. We shred a lot of the lumber and the wood that come out of these houses. So we've been very responsible in how we do demolition. For them, and the EPA will raise their hand and say, we agree with you, but we need somebody to make a decision. And as a regulator, we're not making that. We need government officials above us to step up and say, it's okay to be responsible, and here's how you can do it without chewing up such a vital part of your budget.
Yes. Could you talk about the future of retail? It seems to me there are lots of empty retail spaces all over, and then they keep on paving golf courses and farmland, and it seems to me people are buying stuff on the internet, and none of it makes sense to me. So.
Yeah, we can spend 6 more forums on retail. It's a challenge. You know, we've had some really wonderful retail power centers open up, such as Steel Yard, where there was a lack of good quality retail within a couple mile radius. But I also have behind me in Garfield Heights example of bad retail, where they built the City View, I'm sorry. And now they're suffering the consequences. They tore up quality housing. Not only it wasn't completed, and they started Bridgeview, and tore up housing to start another development because they chased the dollars of what they thought retail would bring, and it's absolutely in the wrong direction. We are over retail in our market right now.
Yes, my father in the 1960s bought a house in Maple Heights, and in 2007 he went to nursing home, and his wife had to move out, and she had a lease agreement. It was appraised, the house was appraised at $90,000. Lease to own, so somebody had agreed, but they didn't get the loan. And 5 years later, they had moved and they had trashed the house, and I had to give my stepmother $15,000 in order to sell the house for $15,000. Okay, so after all that, there was nothing. And I have a house in Beechwood, and I hope, because I can remember Maple Heights being a thriving community. I remember when Southgate was new, and it was like a mile-long shopping center. I live in Beechwood, and I think that's great, but 30 years from now, am I going to be facing the same thing?
I hope not, but I would tell you that I've heard that story, and I'm not I've heard a story like that 100 times. In the land bank, I don't know if it's still true, Tony, they were getting an average of one person a day calling and saying, I want to give you the house. And where were they? They were in communities like Maple Heights, they were in Garfield Heights, they were in Cleveland Heights, they were in Euclid, Warrensville.
Bedford,
People saying, we give up.
Oakwood.
You know, in 2010, the Federal Reserve Bank, and Tony hit it on earlier, Federal Reserve Bank did a study in 2010. The average house in Cleveland is on the market 954 days before it sells. So if it's your father or your stepmother or your parents who are trying to sell that home so they could get some last few dollars out, they needed for a nursing, they needed to bury their parents, right? So it's a tragedy. No, I think Beechwood's a great community, and I think as long as we don't lose our minds when it comes to lending again and are aggressive in making sure that people are given loans that they can repay, we should be okay. And I'd like to think that we've learned a lesson. But I've said that, and except we in this country, when it comes to banking and money, need to really learn lessons about every 15 years, right? I mean, it was the S&L crisis of the early 80s, remember? 83. And then it was WorldCom and global crime. I mean, all these crises. Maybe this one is bad enough for us to not repeat those mistakes.
Let's, if we can do real quickly, play the video at least so we have a little vibrancy of what's going on. If we can kind of roll the, this isn't a roll out the red carpet, but it just gives a little sense of what our community development corporations are doing. How long is it? Just a 3-minute song.
Sometimes I get a good feeling, yeah. I get a feeling that I never had before. No, I get a good feeling, yeah. Oh, sometimes
You'll see me on a skateboard here later on. And if you can name who the singer is, you get bonus points.
There are reasons why we all have to be committed to the neighborhoods. And
That's
that
not me
is
on a
because
skateboard.
they are one of our best opportunities to keep and attract young people, young talent, creative, innovative talent that will fuel our economy in the future.
Gotta love the life that we live in. Oh, sometimes I get a good feeling, yeah. I get a good feeling, yeah. Oh, sometimes I get a good feeling, yeah.
On the pulse of this new day, you may have the grace to look up and out and into your sister's eyes and into your brother's face, your country, and say simply, very simply, with hope, good morning.
So there is hope in our community, and there's a lot of great things going on. And we have to keep pushing that agenda. And I never thought I'd be quoting Flo Rida in a message, but giving up is not an option for us. So we're going to continue that challenge. And Jim and I will be here for a little while after, so long as the coffee's hot. So.
And ask if anyone is helping condominium boards, working with condominium boards so that they are able to help those folks in their buildings to stay the course of significant lowering of values in the sale, not only in the sale, but in the appraisal from the city of Cleveland.
Anybody here from Moreland Courts? All right. For those of you who don't know, Moreland Courts is in the city on the Shaker border. That neighborhood of Cleveland within that Shaker school system has the highest property tax rate in the state of Ohio. When I was the treasurer, you may or may not know this, we met with the board at Moreland Courts because it was a combination of the reassessments as a result of the multi-million-dollar renovation and the property taxes and the maintenance fee that really had reduced the value of the average unit in Moreland Courts to really zero, right? I mean, I don't know how many of you know Zach Brule, but he just bought this spectacular unit in the Moreland Courts for, I think, about $10,000. It's multi-story, beautiful, you know, on the square. So I'm telling you that for a reason. That we met with the board, and I controlled the board of revision along with other members, one of whom is now in prison. We argued at the board and the lawyer for Moreland Courts that we had to plummet the value of Moreland Courts to virtually nothing. And we had done it at Moreland Courts. We did it also at a place called Cashel-Mara on the west side, where another issue, huge assessments to save a complex over on the lake. So I think we have to be flexible, and I think we have to do that. You need to know condominium ownership is in trouble all over town. If you don't know the Gold Coast, there's a place called the Carlisle, there's a place called the Winton, and there are other places, and they're all struggling with high taxes. And when we did the Moreland Courts deal, we met with the Shaker schools and the city of Shaker, and we did that cooperatively. So yes, I did. There is no elected treasurer anymore. I don't know who the treasurer is this week, but you know, you could find out. You should try to work with the board and the new county government, which will be coming in come January.
And some of the stories that we've read nationally, and Jim and I have been to a number of these conferences, these condo associations, some of the most bitter fights, pitting friends against each other have happened around paying maintenance fees, and it really has turned the market upside down and has made pitted enemies against each other that you never would have thought of before, where they actually posted pictures of people saying they can't use the pool, they can't use the community room because they haven't paid their fees, which is really dragging down the entire market.
I live in University Heights, and we have a wonderful tree program. I have 2 very happy accolade elms planted on my tree lawn. Is that something that has the potential to be helpful countywide?
Well, one of the most active people in this new coalition is a woman who lives in Cleveland Heights. So we talk about, the program is going to be called Reforce City, primarily Cleveland-based, but there's a lot of suburban interest, and I think there should be an effort to replant trees all over Northeast Ohio, including Shaker Heights. I see Jan Devereaux here and others. Plant them everywhere. I mean, I happen to live near Lakewood. You know, every time there's a bad storm, Lakewood seems to lose another dozen large trees. So it's a process we have to stay ahead of.
We have time for one more question.
Jan?
Actually, this isn't a question. I just want to tell you that I have spent many, many years growing up in Cleveland. I grew up on the west side near Edgewater Beach and am now at Shaker Square. And I want you to know that I believe that Cleveland is the most wonderful city in the whole wide world.
I want to thank you both, Mr. Rokakis, Mr. Brancatelli, for your engaging remarks today. Now the announcements. Mr. Brancatelli's made a suggestion, and Jim Rokakis seconded the selection of University Settlement as the recipient of last week's offertory collection, and $592 were collected. We passed out. Next Sunday, March 9th, is a breakfast Sunday. All of you are invited. I am told that their eggs will be served along with a mystery meat. 2 Sundays from now, on March 16th, John Seeger, President and CEO of Population Connection, will speak on Soaring Past 7 Billion, Population Challenges for a Crowded World. You are all invited upstairs for this morning's church services. The Reverend Daniel Budd's sermon is entitled The Heart That Gives. The subject is that of stewardship. And all of you are, of course, invited. I believe we have one more message.
Yes, the video ended with hope. I want to invite all of you to Active Hope, How to Face the Mess We're In Without Going Crazy, workshop next Saturday. I'll be taking sign-ups here, and if you sign up today as associated with the forum, you don't have to pay today, but it's the reduced amount for First Church members and friends. It'll be an exciting day to really confront how we can face these kinds of messes with hope, personally and as a society. So hope you'll join us for that workshop.
If you've not signed up on our clipboard sheet for the future email reminders of upcoming forums, please do so at the coffee table. If you have any additional comments or questions for our speakers, please see them up here in the front of the room. Thank you for joining us today.